He was the kind of man who carried his past not like a memory, but like a weight strapped to his shoulders, pressing him down with every step. To the people who passed him on the street, he looked ordinary, another face in the crowd, another man just trying to make it through the day. But if they had looked closely, if they had been able to hear the storms inside his chest, they would have known that every smile he forced was covering a battlefield, every glance he avoided was hiding the fear that he was not enough. His scars told stories, and though most people never asked, he lived every day hearing their voices echo inside his mind. There was the scar across his hand, a reminder of the factory job he once had, where one careless mistake not only left a mark on his skin but also cost him his position, his pride, and the respect of those around him. He told people it was just an accident, but deep down he believed it was proof of his incompetence. Then there were the scars carved deeper than skin, the scars of betrayal when friends he trusted turned their backs, the scars of humiliation when his efforts fell short, the scars of heartbreak when love walked away and left him questioning if he was ever truly worth keeping. He carried all of these quietly, never daring to share them, because the world had taught him that showing pain was weakness, and weakness was something a man like him could not afford. Nights were the hardest. When the noise of the day faded and silence filled the room, his mind grew louder, replaying every failure, every mistake, every moment when life seemed to whisper, "You are not enough." He tried drowning it out with distractions, music blasting in his ears, endless scrolling through his phone, work that kept him busy but never fulfilled, but the silence always returned, and with it, the heavy truth he was trying so hard to escape. The mirror became his enemy. Every time he stood before it, he didn't see the man he could be. He only saw the man who had been broken down by life, a man who survived but never truly lived. His eyes carried exhaustion that sleep couldn't cure, and his posture carried defeat he didn't admit out loud. He hated his reflection not because of how he looked but because of what it reminded him. The scars were still there, the pain was still alive, and he had no idea how to break free from it. 4 years, he lived in this silent prison, convincing himself that scars meant weakness, that pain was proof he wasn't worthy of greatness. He believed his story was over before it even had a chance to begin, that his scars would forever be chains binding him to a life of quiet suffering. He walked through his days like a shadow of himself, existing but not living, breathing but not thriving, waiting for something, anything, to give him a reason to rise again. Yet, buried under the weight of all that despair, there was a spark, a flicker so faint he often mistook it for nothing. But that spark, though small, refused to die. The turning point did not arrive with fireworks or dramatic music. It came in silence, in the simplest of moments, when he stood in front of the mirror one morning and for the first time in years, he allowed himself to truly look. Not just a glance at his hair or his clothes, not just a quick check before walking out the door, but a long, raw, unflinching look. The kind of look that strips away every excuse, every mask, every lie you've been telling yourself just to survive. He saw himself clearly, and it hurt. His shoulders slouched not from physical exhaustion, but from years of carrying regret. His eyes, once bright with youthful hope, now looked dull, weighed down by disappointment. His face told the story of nights spent awake in anger and mornings spent wishing he could start over. But most of all, he saw his scars, not just the ones etched into his skin, but the invisible ones that wrapped around his heart like chains. For so long, he had avoided this moment, terrified of the truth he might see. And yet, as he stared, something unexpected happened. He didn't just see weakness. He didn't just see pain. He saw survival. Every scar that once haunted him now began to whisper a different story. That cut on his hand wasn't just a failure at a job, it was proof that he had tried, that he had worked, that he had fought to earn his place. The heartbreak that had once shattered him wasn't just a wound, it was proof that he had loved deeply, that his heart was capable of more than bitterness. The betrayals that had left him hollow weren't just endings, they were lessons that carved out space for new beginnings. The longer he looked, the more he realized that his scars were not proof of defeat, they were proof of endurance. He was still here. He was still breathing. Life had struck him down more times than he could count, but none of those strikes had destroyed him completely. For the first time, he allowed himself to see his scars not as shame but as survival. It was not a sudden burst of confidence. He didn't suddenly transform into someone new. But in that quiet moment, staring at his reflection, he made a decision that would alter the course of his life. He whispered it, almost afraid to say it too loud, as if the world might hear and try to stop him. These scars will no longer hold me down. They will become the reason I rise. And with those words, a shift occurred inside him. The man who once hated his reflection began to see possibility where he had only seen pain. It was fragile, like the first light of dawn after a long night, but it was real. He stepped away from the mirror not as a man who was healed, but as a man who was ready to begin the work of turning his scars into strength. And sometimes, that is all it takes, not perfection, not instant transformation, but a single decision to stop running from your pain and start using it as fuel. The decision to rise was powerful, but it did not erase the pain overnight. Change never comes in an instant, it comes in layers, in battles fought in silence, in choices repeated day after day until the new becomes stronger than the old. He quickly realized that making peace with his scars meant learning to carry them, not bury them. 4 years, he had tried to numb the ache with distractions, to silence the memories with noise, to pretend the wounds were not there. But now he chose a different path, to sit with his pain, to listen to it, to understand it. At first, it was unbearable. Writing in a journal felt like ripping open wounds he had spent years covering. Revisiting old memories felt like reopening doors to rooms filled with shadows. But with each entry he wrote, with each painful truth he faced, something inside him shifted. The weight that had always pressed on his chest began to feel lighter, not because it disappeared, but because he was no longer carrying it alone in silence. He began to see patterns he had never noticed before. The times he had been betrayed revealed how much he had given his trust too freely. The failures that once mocked him showed him where he had rushed instead of preparing. The heartbreaks that had left him hollow revealed the strength of a heart that could still love even after being broken. Slowly, he realized that pain is a teacher, and scars are the proof that lessons have been lived. What once seemed like marks of weakness were in fact maps, guides showing him where he had been, what he had endured, and what he needed to grow. The more he listened, the more he learned, and the more he learned, the more power he felt. Still, the process was messy. There were nights he broke down, questioning if he had the strength to keep going. There were mornings he looked at his scars and still heard the old voices telling him he was not enough. But instead of running from those moments, he met them head-on. He whispered to himself, "I am still here. If I survived it once, I can survive it again." That simple truth became his anchor. Pain was no longer something that defined him, it became something he carried with purpose. Like a soldier carrying armor, like a craftsman carrying tools, he carried his scars not as shame but as reminders that he had endured what others might not have. And with every day that passed, he grew a little stronger, not by avoiding the pain, but by walking through it and proving to himself that it no longer controlled him. The decision to carry his pain instead of running from it was only the beginning. Real transformation demanded more, it demanded that he build himself piece by piece, with patience, with discipline, and with the courage to face every weakness head-on. In the past, he had lived reactively, letting life control him, waiting for circumstances to change before he dared to move. But now, for the first time, he began to live deliberately. He started with his body, because he knew it was the easiest place to see visible progress. The first morning he forced himself out of bed before sunrise, his muscles protested, his mind screamed to quit, and every excuse lined up in his head like soldiers ready to drag him back to the comfort of failure. But he pushed anyway. One push-up became two, one lap became another, sweat poured as if years of frustration were leaving his body. His lungs burned, his arms shook, but every drop of pain reminded him he was alive and fighting. Day after day, he returned to the grind. Not because it was easy, but because it was hard. The discipline of training gave him something he had never truly possessed: control. He began to see his reflection change, not just in muscle or posture, but in the fire that returned to his eyes. For the first time in years, he didn't hate the man in the mirror. He was still scarred, still imperfect, but now those scars looked different. They looked like proof that he had survived the worst, and now he was strong enough to build the best. Alongside training his body, he trained his mind. He filled notebooks with thoughts, lessons, and goals. He read books that challenged him, speeches that ignited him, and stories of others who had clawed their way out of darkness. Instead of drowning in distraction, he fed his soul with strength. Slowly, the people around him began to notice. Friends who once pitied him now watched with quiet respect. Co-workers who once overlooked him now saw a man who carried himself with purpose. Strangers who crossed paths with him could feel the energy he carried, an energy that came not from arrogance, but from resilience. And still, he reminded himself daily that this was only the road, not the destination. He was not aiming to erase his scars. He was learning to transform them into the very foundation of his new self. Every drop of sweat, every disciplined choice, every small victory stacked upon the next until the man who had once lived in silence was becoming someone entirely different, someone unshakable, someone who would never again let his scars define him as broken. Discipline quickly became both his greatest ally and his toughest enemy. At first, it felt like a burden, waking up before dawn when every muscle begged for rest, turning down easy pleasures when his old self craved comfort, staying consistent when no one was watching and no applause was given. There were mornings when he stared at the alarm clock, bargaining with himself for just 10 more minutes. There were nights when exhaustion screamed louder than determination, and the thought of repeating the same grind again tomorrow nearly broke him. But in those moments, he remembered the man he once was, the man who hid behind his scars, the man who allowed pain to define him instead of shape him. That memory was heavier than the weights he lifted, sharper than the soreness in his body. It was that memory that pushed him to get up, to move, to sweat, to endure. The beauty of discipline is that it doesn't reward you immediately. It tests you first, breaking down your excuses, stripping away your comfort, forcing you to prove how badly you want the life you say you want. And slowly, day by day, he passed those tests. He no longer needed motivation to push him forward, he had something stronger: habit. The gym was no longer a place of torture, but a temple where he rebuilt himself, brick by brick, rep after rep, sweat after sweat. His mind, once scattered and restless, now grew sharper, clearer, more focused. Every journal entry, every page of wisdom he absorbed, every reflection on his scars became fuel for his growth. Discipline didn't just change his actions, it changed his identity. He began to think differently, speak differently, move differently. The same man who once avoided mirrors now looked into them with steady eyes, not because he was finished, but because he finally respected the man looking back at him. The world outside hadn't fully noticed yet, but inside, a revolution was taking place. He was no longer a prisoner of his scars, he was becoming the kind of man who could use them as armor. And though the journey was far from over, he had learned one of the most important truths: that discipline, though heavy, is the weight that strengthens you, while regret is the weight that destroys you. He chose discipline. And with every choice, he stepped further away from who he once was, and closer to who he was destined to become. There came a time when the progress he made on the outside was no longer enough. His body was stronger, his habits sharper, his routine disciplined, but deep inside, there was still a storm raging. He realized that while he had rebuilt his muscles, he had not yet fully confronted the wounds hidden deep within his heart. Every scar had a story, and every story carried pain he had buried for years. The truth was, he had been running not from failure anymore, but from the emotions tied to those scars. One night, as he sat alone in the quiet, his journal open but his pen frozen, he forced himself to face what he had long avoided. He wrote not about goals, not about dreams, but about the hurts he carried, the betrayal he endured, the loneliness he suffered, the shame that haunted him. Each word spilled onto the paper like blood drawn from an old wound, and for the first time, he didn't try to stop it. Tears came, the kind he had refused for years, believing they were a sign of weakness. But in that moment, he understood, weakness is not in feeling pain, but in pretending it doesn't exist. By acknowledging his scars, he was not making himself smaller, he was making himself stronger. For scars are not just marks of what broke you, they are proof of what did not destroy you. That night, staring at the pages soaked with his truth, he whispered a vow to himself: I will not hide anymore. I will not run from my past. I will use it. The following days, his training felt different. Every push-up was no longer just about building muscle, it was about pushing away self-doubt. Every mile he ran was no longer just about endurance, it was about outrunning the lies he once believed. Every rep with the weights became a conversation with his past. You tried to break me, but here I stand, stronger than before. His body became a battlefield where his pain was transformed into resilience, and his scars into symbols of survival. He began to realize something profound: the mirror does not just show the outside. It reflects the inside too. And when he looked at himself now, he saw a man who wasn't pretending anymore. He saw a man who had faced his demons, acknowledged his wounds, and refused to let them hold power over him. The scars were still there, yes, but now, they glowed with a different meaning. They were no longer reminders of weakness, but reminders of strength. And with this realization, he stepped into the next chapter of his journey not as a man hiding from his scars, but as a man carrying them proudly, as evidence of what he had overcome. It's one thing to grow in silence, to fight your battles alone, to rebuild when no one is watching. But it's another to step into the world and let it test everything you've become. The world does not always applaud transformation, it often doubts it. And he soon discovered that while he had grown strong within his walls, the outside world was waiting with trials far tougher than the ones in the gym or on the pages of his journal. People remembered the man he used to be. They remembered the weak version of him, the one who gave up easily, the one who drowned in excuses, the one who lived in shadows. And when they saw him stand tall now, some were inspired, but others were threatened. Some questioned him: who are you to change? Who are you to rise? Their words were not daggers, they were tests. At work, he faced challenges designed to break his patience. The same people who ignored him before now tried to drag him back down with doubt, criticism, and subtle sabotage. In friendships, he discovered that not everyone celebrated his growth. Some mocked his discipline, calling it obsession. Some drifted away, uncomfortable with the new man he was becoming, because his light exposed their unwillingness to change. It hurt, deeply. After all, Scars were not just made by life itself, but also by people. And once again, life gave him a choice: to let this pain harden him into bitterness, or to use it to sharpen his resolve. He chose the latter. He reminded himself daily that the world does not define him, his actions do. Every criticism became fuel, every doubt became motivation, every rejection became proof that he was on a path not everyone was meant to understand. When they told him he couldn't, he showed them he could. When they waited for him to quit, he kept going. And slowly, something remarkable happened. The same people who doubted him began to watch silently. Some even asked him how he did it, how he found the strength to keep going despite everything. And in those moments, he realized something vital. Strength is not proven in solitude, but in resistance. It is not measured by how much weight you lift when alone, but by how firmly you stand when the world pushes against you. His scars had taught him survival, but now life was teaching him leadership. By living as proof of resilience, he was giving others permission to believe in their own. He didn't have to preach. His scars spoke louder than words. The test of the world was brutal, but it revealed that his strength was no longer fragile. It was unshakable. Every journey of transformation carries with it a moment where the weight feels unbearable, where the tests seem endless, where even the strongest spirit begins to crack. For him, that moment arrived unexpectedly, when life struck harder than he had prepared for. Just as he had started to feel steady, just as he thought he was finally climbing beyond the reach of his scars, tragedy struck again. A project he had poured months of effort into collapsed in a single week. Financial pressures cornered him. A person he trusted betrayed him. The walls seemed to close in, and suddenly, all the progress he had made felt fragile. Old voices whispered again, the same voices that once told him he was not enough. "See, you thought you had changed, but you're still the same broken man. Your scars still own you." For a brief moment, he believed them. He felt the weight of despair pressing down, heavier than any barbell he had ever lifted, crushing his chest, stealing his breath. He skipped his training for the first time in months. He avoided the mirror. He closed his journal, unable to write a single word. He felt himself sliding backward, toward the darkness he had fought so hard to escape. This was the breaking point, the moment where most men give up, where discipline crumbles, where scars reclaim their power. But deep within, a spark remained. One night, sitting alone in his dimly lit room, he thought about everything he had endured before, the nights of loneliness, the years of pain, the countless battles that had already tried and failed to destroy him. If those storms couldn't end me, he whispered to himself, why should this one? And in that whisper, his spark grew into fire. He dragged himself up, laced his shoes, and stepped into the night air. He ran, not fast, not far, but with every step, he reminded himself that he was still alive, still fighting, still unbroken. The tears streaming down his face were not of defeat, but of defiance. That night, he discovered something new about strength. True resilience is not built in victories, but in recoveries. It is not about never falling, but about rising every time you do. He realized that scars are not proof that you were weak once, they are proof that you refused to stay weak. And so, the breaking point did not break him. Instead, it became the forge where his spirit was tempered, where his scars turned from wounds into weapons, where his resolve became unshakable. From that night forward, he promised himself one thing: no matter how many times life knocks me down, I will always rise stronger. After surviving his breaking point, something inside him shifted permanently. Pain no longer felt like an enemy. It felt like a teacher. He began to see every scar, every wound, every failure as a lesson carved into his life, and he realized he had a responsibility that went beyond himself. His journey was no longer just about survival or self-improvement, it was about using his scars to light the path for others still trapped in their own darkness. He remembered the countless nights when he felt utterly alone, when he believed no one could understand his suffering. And now, he knew that if he could share his story, if he could stand as proof that survival was possible, then maybe someone else wouldn't give up. So, he began to speak, not loudly, not to crowds at first, but quietly, to people who crossed his path. To the young man at the gym who felt too weak to begin. To the coworker secretly drowning in self-doubt. To the friend who carried silent pain behind forced smiles. His words weren't polished or perfect, they were raw, honest, real. He didn't hide his scars anymore. He rolled up his sleeves and let them see, saying without words, "If I can rise, so can you." And something incredible happened, people listened. Not because he had all the answers, but because he had walked through the fire and come out standing. The more he gave, the stronger he became. Every time he helped someone else find hope, his own hope grew deeper. Every time he lifted another soul, his own strength multiplied. He realized that his scars had never been meant to shame him, they were meant to guide others. His life transformed from a fight for personal redemption into a mission of impact. He was no longer just a man who survived, he was becoming a man who inspired. And in that transformation, he found a purpose larger than himself. For the first time, he understood the true meaning of strength. Strength is not about how much you can carry for yourself, it is about how much you can carry for others. Strength is not about building walls to protect your wounds, it is about opening those wounds to heal someone else. His pain had become his purpose, and in embracing that purpose, he discovered a light brighter than any he had ever known. The scars that once broke him had now become the reason others believed they too could rise. In the end, his journey was not about erasing the past or pretending the scars never existed. It was about transforming them into the very foundation of who he had become. The man who once hid in shadows, broken by pain and haunted by failure, now stood tall not because life had grown easier, but because he had grown stronger. He learned that scars are not a sign of weakness, they are a badge of survival, proof that even when life tried to bury you, you refused to stay underground. Every scar on his body, every wound in his heart, every hardship he had endured had been stitched into his identity like threads of steel. As he walked forward, he no longer sought perfection. Instead, he sought authenticity. He was not the flawless man who never fell, he was the scarred man who always rose. And in that truth, he found his power. His story was not about being untouchable, but about being unbreakable. He shared his journey openly now, standing before crowds, looking into the eyes of those who still carried fresh wounds, and telling them with unwavering conviction, "Your scars are not your end, they are your beginning. Don't hide them. Don't fear them. Wear them. Because they are the proof that you are stronger than what tried to destroy you." The legacy he built was not measured in money, fame, or recognition. It was measured in lives touched, in people who decided not to give up because they saw his example, in souls who found strength through his honesty. He became living proof that suffering can be transformed into strength, that failure can be turned into fuel, and that scars can become the most powerful story a person can tell. And though his journey was far from over, he no longer feared what lay ahead. Because the man who had once been broken now carried a truth unshakable: life will cut, life will wound, life will scar, but none of it has the power to defeat you if you choose to rise. In the quiet of his heart, he whispered his final vow: "My scars are not my shame, they are my strength, my story, and my legacy." And with that, he stepped forward not as a man defined by pain, but as a man defined by the fire that pain had ignited. A man whose scars no longer chained him, but freed him. A man who had turned his scars into strength.